Are you dialing in from, that looks like a Los Angeles background?
Well, no, I'm actually down south. I'm in Hilton Head, South Carolina, on a little bit of a press junket as we speak. And I, again, really appreciate you taking the time to speak with me. It really, really means the world. Thank you.
My pleasure. So we were set up by the wonderful folks at Chipster, and they said, hey, Steve's playing in Riverhead and all that. And I know about your credits, but I don't know what to expect from you and the Hollywood Stars Live, or the All-Stars rather. What do we get when we go to a gig like the Riverhead one from you and team?
Darren, the Hollywood All-Stars are a passion project of mine that I started, gosh, probably 6 or so years ago. And the idea behind it was I was going to take a collection of friends of mine that I've, played with a variety of artists with, either toured with or recorded with, and put together a quote unquote supergroup. I was very fortunate in that most of the people and artists that I contacted were thrilled about the idea of the project and were, very quick to come on board. And for the Riverhead show, we have the horn section from the Rolling Stones Steel Wheels tour, the Uptown Horns. The lead singer, that we have two lead singers, a male and a female. The male will be Tommy Bowes. Tommy, probably for 7 years or so, fronted Tower of Power. Was the vocalist on their first album on Epic Records, Monster on a Leash. The female singer will be Tiffany Teasell, who was actually signed to Quincy Jones' label, Quest Records. The bass player will be Scott Spray from the Johnny and Edgar Winter groups. I mean, it's a 13-piece collection of really superstar players, and we're all anxious to come out to Riverhead and make some noise.
When you're mentioning Tommy's credits, you left out his work with Bernie Williams.
Absolutely. I mean, you know what?
World Series champion.
Yeah, and Bernie has actually sat in with us on a couple of different occasions. It's funny. We did a show in Fairfield a couple of years ago. And of course, I'm going through my whole rap, Darren, about how, people that are familiar with bands know that a band is like a family, a band is like a team. And we're going to bring out somebody very special now who also knows a little something about teamwork. I'd like to introduce to you from the New York Yankees, Bernie Williams. So Bernie comes out with his guitar and the place erupted, as you could probably imagine. But no, Bernie's a great guy, very talented guitar player too.
Yes, I had the pleasure of speaking with him briefly on a red carpet, and I couldn't believe how patient he was, because you can imagine he's there to promote his music, but the World Series questions always come to him. But yes, it's great to see that his musical career is now longer than his playing career. So he stuck with it. It's not just a side project.
No. And you know what, Darren? It's not the kind of situation where here's a very talented athlete who decides to pick up a guitar. On the contrary, I think guitar was his first passion before even going into baseball.
Right.
And he is supremely talented. He works as hard at his music as he did with his baseball career. So, everything that comes to him, I'm very proud of him, and it's very well deserved.
For this gig in Riverhead, does it still have Andy Abel and Lee Finkelstein in the group?
Andy Abel will be there. Yes, Andy, I should mention, was the co-producer on our album that's on Deko Entertainment. Andy has played with Blood, Sweat, and Tears, Talking Heads, and is just an all-round great guy, very talented engineer, guitarist. Lee Finkelstein, who did 4 of the 5 tracks on the record, will not be on this one, but on one of the tracks, Living in America, it's the only cover we did, and that's a whole nother long story I could get into with you if you care to discuss that. But the drummer that we had on that song was from the Joe Bonamassa band, Tony Cintron. We also had Will Lee from the David Letterman show playing bass on that track. So Tony Cintron will be our drummer on the Suffolk Theater gig. And again, you know what? It's not even a matter of, having a substitute musician. When you're dealing with people of this caliber, they're all great. And it's just whatever flavor you have for that evening. But I mean, the Riverhead show is something we really are looking forward to.
Now, this is intended to be a compliment, despite how it's going to start. So when I go through your credits, and of course your recording career with CBS, and playing with and/or recording with James Brown and Peter Criss and Gene Cornish from the Rascals, etc. It's this thing where you were always around the stars, and you've played stuff that people don't necessarily know that, hey, Steve played on that. But I would have to imagine that a lot of the work you did is not known. And by that, I mean, All Music Guide doesn't have it there. And to give an example, in interviewing Mark LaFrance, he's a backing vocalist and drummer in Vancouver who played on all the Bob Rock records. So that is him on Bon Jovi stuff and on Poison and all that. But it just says special thanks, Mark LaFrance. In your case, I'd imagine that you're harboring some secrets as to stuff that you've done and stuff we've heard.
Well, yes, Darren. And you know what? My career in contemporary music, I mean, I started classical piano lessons when I was 4.5, but my career in contemporary music actually began as a teenager. And I was signed to Epic CBS Records at, gosh, I think I was 17 or 18 years old, back when there was black vinyl. And that was going to be my big entree into the music business, which obviously for a lot of political reasons, it ended up not happening at that point. But it led me through a series of different artists that I had the honor to play with that, and again, wasn't always me being the star. It wasn't always me being the songwriter or the producer. But I take a lot of pride in my keyboard playing as well. So, you know, it's all related in one way or another. And I'm very grateful for all the opportunities that have come my way, for sure.
So does the set list that we see at a show like Riverhead touch upon the Stones and touch upon stuff that you played on?
Yeah, you know, that's a very good point. You know, when the band started, and this is probably going back 5 or 6 years, it basically was a cover band. When the Hollywood All-Stars began, that was sort of what we were doing. It was a collection of all of us, and we said, you know what, this will be cool. Let's go out and do songs by a lot of the artists that we've all had the privilege to play with, but we'll put our own spin on them. And I realized during COVID, during the lockdown, that if I was going to take this act to the next level, it meant having original material. It meant writing for it. And again, we did that over the lockdown, and I was more than thrilled that Deko picked the project up like practically out of the gate. I think I had pitched it to 1 or 2 labels, hadn't even really got started, and Deko said, we want this. And they were a very good company for me to get hooked up with. They have a very eclectic mix of artists, ranging from Carmine Appice from Vanilla Fudge to Joe Bouchard from Blue Oyster Cult, Tiffany, the pop star from the 80s. And it felt like a really good home for the Hollywood All-Stars. So anyway, to get back to your question, yes, you will be hearing us, obviously, having the Uptown Horns from the Steel Wheels tour, we have to do a Rolling Stones song. Having Scott Spray on bass from the Edgar Winter group, we have to have an Edgar Winter song. Right. And what we will do, Darren, is to mix those covers in with the songs from our EP. And it's really done in a very cool way where I don't want to say that people aren't aware they're listening to an original song versus a cover, but everything that we play sounds familiar to the audience. And I think that's the key.
Right. You actually hijacked something that I was going to ask in a good way, which is that Deko, the roster of Deko has a lot of people who sold millions of albums, yet are pushing the ball forward with new material. And in the olden days, you didn't get a record deal without a good lawyer. And these days, the rules are different. You just go, hey, you want to put out my thing? And then they look you up and they go, okay. In the case of Deko, how did you find them or connect with them?
You know, and I'm sure you know better than anyone how this business is all
better
about
than anyone. I wouldn't say that.
Let me put it this way, as well as many, that it is really a business built on relationships. Sure. I was doing an interview before the project was even really finished, much like the one you and I are doing now, with a friend of mine who's a great drummer, Steve Luongo in Florida.
Oh, yeah. John Entwistle Band, I believe.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
And Steve and I became friendly. I had let him listen to some of the pre-production tapes of the project, and he was blown away. And he said, do me a favor, come on my show. Let's talk about this. And of course, he too was familiar with a lot of the musicians involved. And we're doing our interview, as I said, much like you and I are right now. And he said to me, you know what? I've got someone I want you to send this project to. I just signed John Entwistle's catalog, or some of it, some of the tapes that we were working on, with this new company in Jersey. They're a great family. They're a great blah, 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 blah. And he said, do me a favor and send it to them. And that's how the connection came about. And after speaking with them, it was a good vibe, Darren. They're really good people. You know, and yes, to get a record deal in today's day and age, there's 2 ways to look at it. First of all, it's next to impossible. Second of all, there are many artists that still feel I can do it on my own. What do I need a record company for? In this case, I was honored to be able to share a roster with all of these incredible musicians, some of whom you've just mentioned. And for the Hollywood All-Stars, who are basically an unknown entity, to be picked up by any label is a thrill for me, and I need the help. You know, I'm certainly out there promoting and pitching the project as best I can, but that's why I'm so grateful for, you know, interviews like yours. You try to get the word out about the band.
Simply put, I've always found that 5 to 10% of the fan base read the liner notes, cared about who played on the records, etc., who wrote the songs, who produced, who engineered. And that's why the music nerds like myself would go, oh, Toby Wright also did this record? Okay, let's check it out. Oh, okay, it's a Bob Rock thing. Let's get into it. In your case, you're one of those guys, and a lot of these people you played with who sold 10, 20, 30, 40 million albums, the 5 to 10% is enough to fill up venues like the Riverhead Theater, bigger rooms as well. So that's why I think it's important to be doing what you're doing. Now, putting that compliment also aside here, I wasn't sure, what did you do with Peter Criss from Kiss?
When Peter left Kiss, he had moved to New Canaan, Connecticut. I was living in Connecticut at the time, in Trumbull in Fairfield County.
Oh,
And Peter decided he was going to start his own band. He had it with Kiss. He wanted his own career. And, you know, as many artists do, they want their own solo thing to happen. He was married at the time to Deborah. Deborah was, as a little girl, I don't know if you know this or not, was the Coppertone girl. If you ever saw those little Coppertone ads with that little girl in the white bikini falling off, well, that was Deborah when she was a little girl. Yeah. So anyway, through a series of friends of mine, we're all musicians in Fairfield County. You know, it's a very cliquey, small community. A friend of mine, a great singer named Jay Stolman, called a couple of us up and said, and I don't really know, Darren, how Jay's a mover and a shaker. Mm-hmm. Jay gets into stuff. To let you know, he's currently on tour and managing Jose Feliciano.
Okay.
Jay's one of those people that always finds something cool to do. And Jay called us all up and said, you're never going to believe this, but I ran into Peter Criss somewhere in Connecticut or through some connections. He wants to put a band together. And I told him that I have a rhythm section that would be great. And that's how that all came about. And, you know, a really funny story is we were looking for a place to rehearse. Well, you talk about the ultimate basement band. My parents had a house in Trumbull, and Jay says, Steve, do you mind if we rehearse in your parents' basement? Now, Darren, here comes Peter Criss. Not only with a complete drum kit, as you can imagine,
right,
with the gong, complete with a gong, schlepping all this stuff down into my parents' basement so that we could start working on some original material. Well, that lasted for a while. We went through 4 or 5 original songs. We were all collaborating, co-writing. We did some recording in White Plains, and Peter went off in a different direction. A lot of stuff happened that I don't know if it's even appropriate for me to talk about, but suffice to say, we worked with him for, I guess it was about 6 months to a year. And then that dissolved, and we all obviously went on our own merry ways. But he, very, very fun guy. And if you want to talk about stories, you can only imagine.
Yeah, I mean, he was at the highest of the highs in many ways.
Yeah.
But Connecticut, one of my weird obsessions is musical hotbeds that we don't know are musical hotbeds. And in my years of doing interviews, now you just mentioned Peter Criss being around there. I've heard Keith Richards may or may not be around Connecticut in some ways. We know that David Letterman was always living there.
Correct.
But an interview that I did 2 or 3 years ago with Rich Hilton. Do you know Richard Hilton? It's totally normal.
Oh, yes, absolutely. The keyboard player with Nile Rodgers.
Nile Rodgers. He has a bunch of projects where you'll go, hey, what are you working on? And he'll be like, I'm under an NDA. I can't talk about that one. But I always assumed that means he was working for the Stones or Keith Richards.
Yeah, no, Richard's very talented, man. And yeah, you're right. You know what, Darren, there is no shortage of talent. It amazes me. And I mean, people of our generation, but even younger, I mean, a lot of people are knocking a lot of contemporary music. There's so much talent out there now. It's just mind boggling.
Sure. So the last 2 questions I have for you before I let you go, Steve. First one, I keep talking about Riverhead, but what is coming up for you in the Hollywood All-Stars beyond that one gig on Long Island that I obsessively keep mentioning?
Well, and I do, I would like to close out, but when we get there, close out with some further information about the Suffolk. But to answer your question, I feel like I've stepped in some good luck all along the way with this project, and it continues with some airplay that we're continuing to get, which is part of the reason I'm, currently down south visiting a couple of radio stations and continuing to pitch the project. I'm working on having the band booked in some areas where the radio airplay is starting to pick up, which only makes sense. However, the difficult part for us, Darren, is it's a 13-piece group. We are working with two different agencies right now, Downstage Entertainment in New York and Blue Raven Management in Jersey. And the issue always becomes for us, once it, morphs past a gig that we can all drive to, 13 airplane tickets, 13 rooms, 13, and it isn't, it doesn't have the budget of a band like the Rolling Stones. So it's a very tricky tap dance. I don't really want to start booking it into areas and using a different horn section, which is always an option, to go down with a core band and hire people in the area. I really like when the Hollywood All-Stars play to give the audience what they're hearing on the record. And so to answer your question, I'm working on booking more areas. Riverhead is really the first gig outside of our home state of Connecticut that we're going to be doing. The band work mostly theaters in Connecticut, and we've built a very strong fan base there. But it's time that you're going to try to progress outside of just playing in one state. And I'm looking forward to, trying to develop a little bit of a Long Island fan base as well. I know you guys are a lot of great music lovers out there, so I'm confident you'll dig this.
With the Long Island music scene, it used to be there was not much going on. You had to go to the city, but now when you go, there's the Space at Westbury, the Riverhead one, the Patchogue Theater, the traditional one in Westbury, the little theater that's in Port Washington. There, in other words, there's 10 to 15 legitimate venues which we've never had before. So you may eventually find a circuit for yourselves out here, and hope so. So the last question is, in all these years of working on high profile projects, being around high profile people, et cetera, do you think that we'll get a memoir from you about, your Danny Goldberg style bumping into geniuses kind of memoir?
You know what? That's a really great question. I just finished watching, and I don't know if you've seen it yet. I think it's on Amazon Prime, a documentary about Chuck Leavell, keyboard player from the Allman Brothers, Rolling Stones. I mean, he has such a rich career that, and I'm not comparing myself to him in any way, shape, or form, but it really did lead me to think, there are a lot of memories out there going back to my first record deal at 17 years old. And it's something that I have actually started making some cliff notes on. So I would love to do that. I think it'd be fascinating. Whether or not there'd be a million people wanting to buy the book, I don't know, but that's something that remains to be seen.
Well, haven't we learned over the years that it's not about having those million fans? It's about having that loyal 5 to 10,000, and you can earn a living off of that.
Absolutely.
And it grows over time.
Yes. And especially now with the record business being as, tenuous as it is, our live shows and the people that come out to see us that's our blood. We do survive on that. So it's not lost on me how important fans are, the people that are going to put their money down to come out and see our show.
There you go. Well, Steve, thank you for your time. Enjoy Hilton Head. I think a lot of people are going to be jealous when they see this about where you are right now. Golf
Well,
Central.
I believe it or not, I am working hard, Darren. It isn't all, play. So, but I want to thank you again. And again, for anyone that's out there, the Suffolk Theater on Friday, May 12th, the Hollywood All-Stars would love to see you guys and come out and check us out.
Paltrocast.